right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good day. It's Av Singh, agronomist with Gaia Green Organics, and most importantly today, kind of a member of the Grow Up team. The real brains behind this whole Grow Up conference, of course, is Randy Rowe, the co-founder of the Grow Up conference, and Dania Dixon. And they are busily preparing the conference that is scheduled for October 5th, 6th, and 7th at the Scotiabank Convention Center in Niagara Falls. So we hope to see people live and in person there. Very excited. We're taking all the precautionary measures, some innovative ways of making sure that for those who really want to be socially distanced can still be socially distanced and safe. And those who are ready to mingle have that opportunity to mingle as well. So we really hope and encourage you to come out in October. And if you can't make it in October, we are definitely having a Grow Up conference in Victoria. It's going to be on the solstice, June 21st and 22nd in Victoria. And of course, with psychedelics being so prominent in the West Coast, there will be a feature around psychedelics in Victoria as well. But going back to Niagara Falls in October, we are featuring a Psychedelic Summit, and that's the reason for today's talk and our guest for today as well. You know, I do terrible jobs at introductions, Trevor, so you're going to have to do a good fill in here. But the way I look at it, and knowing Trevor, if psychedelics can make you a kinder person, a more generous person, a more creative person, a more dedicated and passionate person, then I'm in it, because that's really what Trevor brings to the psychedelic space. I'm amazed at what he's done in the last decade in terms of promoting psychedelics in Canada. Specifically, some of his work in the east side of Vancouver, working with people challenged with the addiction to opiates and using Ibogaine to help relieve that addiction. But didn't stop there. It continued on to really champion this new renaissance in psychedelics. Trevor is the co-founder of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. He's also the co-founder of Liberty Root Therapy, I believe, and I believe a chief psychedelic officer for a few companies, and definitely a consultant in the psychedelic space. So I'll leave a lot of that to Trevor to kind of introduce himself around. I did want you to maybe speak a little about the Canadian Psychedelic Association, and in terms of some of the events that are coming up soon, some of the past events, and then we'll jump right into some more of an interview. So please welcome Trevor Miller.
Thanks so much, Av. I think you're pretty good at an organic introduction. That was great. I have been involved professionally within the psychedelic space since about 2012, when I started my company, Liberty Root Therapy Ltd. We were able to legally work with a plant medicine called Ibogaine from 2012 through until 2017. And for those that don't know, Ibogaine is derived from a shrub in Africa called Iboga, which has been used ceremonially for centuries. And in the early 1960s, it was discovered that it had powerful anti-addictive properties, especially for opiates. So the first gentleman to realize this, his chemist buddy, knew that he would try just about anything for fun. And he happened to be a fairly large heroin addict, and he took Ibogaine, went on a powerful journey. It tends to be about a 36-hour long psychedelic journey, but he came out the other end and he's like, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. His name was Howard Lotsoff, and he became a real champion for the medicine. So I was able to work with this legally in Canada while it was registered as a natural health product from 2012 through until 2017. And then they rescheduled it. Health Canada put it on the prescription drug list, which is actually a good place for it. A natural health product shouldn't be potentially dangerous. And Ibogaine is really the one, or it's the one psychedelic that is potentially physically dangerous. So we always worked with it within a medicalized context with nurses and doctors involved. Through my work there, I was invited to be on the board of directors for MAPS Canada. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. I served as chair of the board for most of my time with them. I just left them in the last few months, actually, but have been also, as was mentioned, a founding member of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. And that really grew out of as your audience is going to be more than aware, cannabis became legalized in Canada. And as cannabis became legalized in Canada, a lot of the early players were kind of pushed out of the game. A lot of, kind of blatant corporatization happened. And we came together as a group here where I am actually in Caslo, British Columbia, a couple of years ago and said, there were 30 of us. We had all worked professionally, somewhat, as professionally as you can be in the underground with psychedelics for 5 years or more. And we said, what can we do to kind of steer psychedelics in a good way if there's anything we can do? So the Canadian Psychedelic Association grew out of that, and it was registered as a nonprofit on December 31st, actually, of 2019, right before crazy 2020 started. And it's been a real honor to be working with this group. The board of directors is fantastic. We've got a membership of more than 800 people now. 100 of those people are physicians. And that's psychedelicassociation.net if you want to check it out. We started with a campaign, a petition towards decriminalizing plant medicine specifically. We gained 15,000 signatures on that petition. It was read in the House of Commons. We've hosted a lot of great webinars. We've got more upcoming, I think we'll talk about shortly. And we hosted a business ethics webinar. And I think this is important for your audience to know, again, because everybody's kind of business oriented in my understanding. We hosted a business ethics webinar a few months ago now. And out of that, we had great, more than 100 people watching, lots of players in the business space. And we had a lot of them come to us and said, there's a need for a trade association within this psychedelic space. And the Canadian Psychedelic Association, as kind of a agnostic, nonpartisan entity, is in a good position to create that trade association. So we kind of ran with that and have launched a Psychedelic Business Association. If you go to psychedelicassociation.net/PBA, Psychedelic Business Association, you'll get some information on the direction that is taking. And we've got, I think we've got at least a dozen businesses signed up to that now, including Psilocybin, including Psygen, who is a manufacturer. There are a couple who have come on just in the last couple of days, and a lot of other great businesses. So the Psychedelic Association has been a really cool thing to be a part of. I'm honored to work with such a high integrity group of people that really want this to go in a good way. And I think we can get into a bit more on what a good way looks like throughout the rest of the hour here.
Yeah, I'm proud to be a member of the association, and happy that Corey Firth is going to be a part of our advisory board around the Psychedelic Summit, who is the executive director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. So, if any of our audience members do go onto the website, they'll be able to see some of those webinars. You had a great interview with Gabor Mate just around trauma, and of course, Gabor's got that nice the film around the wisdom of trauma, and really highlights how trauma is really the source of so many of our disorders and perhaps diseases that we have in our society. So I encourage our audience to check out the website. There was another one that I wish I had. It was last month. Jasmine Perozic gave one on decolonizing your mind, perhaps. And, just in general, that whole concept of decolonizing our minds around psychedelics is one thing, but, I believe she presented it around the indigenous knowledge. And I guess, could you speak a little bit around the fact that, we're as a country, we're in this collective conscious awareness around how our government and our churches tried to essentially perform cultural, if not, genocide to our indigenous peoples. And now here we are, largely taking traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge and bringing it back into society with psychedelics. Do you want to share some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I guess around colonization in general and decolonizing, it's almost a term that's used, I think, sometimes without considering what it really means. And what it really means is, people came to this land, which at the time was called Turtle Island, and over the course of a couple hundred years, basically eradicated the people that lived here. They're like 98% of the indigenous people that lived on Turtle Island were, killed. And a lot of culture disappeared with that, including culture and knowledge around these plant medicines. So at the same time, I was discussing this with a men's group I was fortunate enough to be a part of last night. And it's important to remember that, to just want to cast blame isn't really solving anything, because this is all related to a cycle of trauma. The people who landed in North America 100, 200 years ago, they were running away from oppressors as well. And, even in kind of Anglo-Saxon England or Europe, the Romans came in with the roads one day and kind of forced their ideas upon everyone who might have been living in a more tribal nature as well. So I really look at these substances as forgiveness medicines. They are very powerful at kind of helping people wipe emotionally the slate clean within each other. So it's I think these tools are a really important piece of ending this cycle of trauma. And I'm thrilled that Jasmine is a part of the board of directors for the Psychedelic Association now. She just brings so much wisdom. She's so well spoken, is way more educated than I am, and really brings so many different facets of understanding to the conversation that she brings to the table. So it's very inspiring. And then we need to recognize that these substances, a lot of them were used traditionally within indigenous cultures. Ayahuasca was used ceremonially and has been for centuries within South America. Iboga in Africa, as I mentioned. The mushrooms were used in Mexico and beyond. And there's been kind of wisdom holders within these traditions. I've been told by Jasmine that there are psychoactive medicines within North America which have been hidden from the white man, as it were. And that's really what happened in a lot of these cultures is, we see this colonization happening, and let's hide the good stuff away so it doesn't get completely extinguished as well. So we just owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to the wisdom holders of these traditions, and need to, as this movement goes forward, and this is another mandate of the Psychedelic Association, and the reason for our Indigenous Advisory Board is, as this industry starts to flourish, as these substances start coming up from the underground, how do we make sure that there's reciprocity and recognition for the wisdom holders that have carried these traditions for so far? I look at it as imagine, my great-grandfather didn't live in Canada, but imagine I had a great-great-grandfather in Canada who was a part of the, you know, the want to eradicate a certain way of being from these lands through getting rid of indigenous culture. And now here we are as great-great-grandchildren recognizing the need to turn towards that culture in order to heal ourselves. So I, on one level, look at it as a great victory that we are looking back towards these ancient modalities. And for me, the truth is the truth. And if something works, then, you know, then the truth is going to shine through. And these substances just work on such a profound, powerful level to heal, that, yeah, I'm glad we're here having conversations like this. It's about time.
I think it's great that the CPA has taken that approach, and one that arguably the cannabis movement has now tried to pick up the pace around trying to decriminalize, because as we're well aware that it is our marginalized groups that are typically more criminalized around psychedelics and or cannabis. So very positive to hear that. And just another plug for the CPA. I believe Erica Dick is giving a history of psychedelics in North America next week. So you know, for those who might want to check that out.
That's, yeah, July 14th, next Wednesday. Erica Dick will be hosted by Dr. Pamela Crisco, and Erica Dick is a psychedelic historian, and she really understands Canada's psychedelic role in the historical movement. And Canada's really, you know, within the Western context, at least, always been on the forefront of what's happening in psychedelics. In the late 50s, early 1960s, in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, Dr. Humphrey Osment was an English doctor who worked in Canada at the time, and they did so much work with LSD. And they used LSD to treat alcoholism with great success, treated more than 700 people with a more than 50% success rate. And if you kind of understand the statistics around treating addiction, those statistics blow our everyday statistics out of the water. Humphrey Osmond actually coined the term psychedelic while he was working in Canada. So that even the word psychedelic, which means to make, psyche means mind or soul. Delic comes from the Greek delos. So psychedelic is mind or soul manifesting. And that word was coined in Canada. So I think Canada's got an incredible cultural history within the Western context, at least, around these substances that that I think we can be proud of and lean upon. And Erica Dick's going to speak a lot about that in a presentation on the 14th. I hope you'll tune in. Super.
And speaking of you know, this webinar was titled "The Past, Present, and Future of Psychedelics," and I do want to draw attention to a talk you gave at the Catalyst conference, and we're kind of following that general format. But I do want to encourage the audience members, you know, feel free to use the chat. Tell us where you're coming from. Ask any questions. We don't have any particular agenda. We've got the opportunity to have Trevor here before he takes off for Mexico, so it's working out really nice. And you know, that was great about learning about Canada's role, because, you know, for me, you know, it would have been like the Timothy Learys and the Ram Dasses and, you know, Rick Doblins, who I would have thought that was the movement, the psychedelic movement in Western culture. But it sounds like you know, Canada was before.
Yeah, it's, you know, personally, I'm a fan of Timothy Leary on many levels. He popularized this topic within the Western mind frame for sure. But prior to that, these substances were used within a therapeutic setting all over North America, like Sandoz. Basically, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, Albert Hofmann was working there, invented LSD there, and sent it out to thousands of therapists. There were, between the in the mid 60s, before they were outlawed, there were thousands, there were so many, I don't know about thousands, I don't want to, I tried to memorize a stat around this, but there were so many clinical trials around using LSD in the mid 60s. It was pretty amazing, all the different reasons they were using LSD and different things they were treating with LSD. So it was actually, the backlash from what Leary got up to that kind of outlawed these for a little while. And, I think things needed to happen the way they happened, perhaps. And yeah, but there was a lot of science, like Stan Groff. He's a true pioneer. If you want to look into the work of Stan Groff, he's one of the earliest LSD researchers. He started very early in the Czech Republic, or in Czechoslovakia at the time, and kind of is still involved. He's a true godfather of these substances within the therapeutic context. So I'd encourage people to check that out.
Well, that's great. For many of us, it also would have been like in the cannabis space, arguably it was, the Sanjay Gupta who all of a sudden said, oh, well, now cannabis is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not to take away from, Michael Pollan and compare him to Sanjay Gupta, but, it was like Michael Pollan coming out and coming out with that book, and, Paul Stamets and others who really repopularized, started that renaissance around psychedelics. And maybe just for our audience, can you just describe what is a psychedelic and
yeah, for sure,
we're using?
Yeah, so like I said, psychedelic means mind or soul manifesting. These are substances that are psychoactive. You take them and your state of mind shifts, oftentimes quite dramatically. Within a therapeutic context, people ask me, well, what are these going to do for me? And I often reflect back that these substances don't necessarily add anything to you. It's more like as we live, we see life through a filter, like a pane of glass. And as our heart gets broken, as we suffer traumas, as life happens, that pane of glass or filter gets dirty. And it gets so dirty, we don't even recognize it's dirty anymore. We just think this is normal. And doing a good psychedelic psychotherapy session, which is oftentimes taking a substance with a therapist or a sitter there minding you, you put on a blindfold, you put on headphones, you go deep into yourself for anywhere from 4 to 12 hours, depending on the substance. And you kind of face your interiority in what is often a challenging way. I think we're moving away from the idea of a bad trip within this therapeutic context. There's more challenging events, and often some of the greatest benefits can come from going through these inner challenging events. And then you come out and it's just as if that glass has been cleaned from the inside out. And once that glass has been polished up a little bit, you're like, wow, actually, life is awesome. I'm well empowered to do whatever I'd like with my life. And I feel like doing that for a change. So it's the word ineffable means it's hard to put words to it. And the word ineffable comes up around the psychedelic experience all the time, because it's really hard to describe exactly what's happening during your journey. I'm working with a physician who just went through his first psychedelic journey recently, and he's like, ineffable, like how do he finally understands that word. Really, it's just impossible to put words to it, and yet there's just tremendous net benefit when doing this right.
So I think many of us would probably it would be the Psilocybin cubensis, any of the magic mushrooms. What are some other? You mentioned the Iboga. What are some other psychedelics that are used as treatments?
Yeah, psilocybin is a big one. Psilocybin mushrooms. If you look at Dr. David Nutt out of the Imperial College in London, created a graph you can Google of most dangerous drugs, from most dangerous to least dangerous. And alcohol by far was the most dangerous. Heroin is next on that list. And the least dangerous by far is magic mushrooms and the psilocybin experience. So that's that. LSD is another therapeutic. Mescaline is the ingredient in different cactus species like peyote and San Pedro. It is featured in Michael Pollan's new book, which I haven't read yet, but I look forward to it. He does a mescaline experience, and I think it's called Your Mind on Drugs or something. Forgive me, Michael Pollan. But yeah, you mentioned his book earlier, and I saw that. I knew for about a year before that was coming out that book was coming out, and I just knew, just knowing how well he writes and how much he's respected, that was going to be a real tipping point for the movement. And sure enough, it really has. Mescaline, iboga, ayahuasca. Ayahuasca contains DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Ayahuasca is a very powerful experience, as is DMT. DMT on its own can be smoked, and ayahuasca, where it's a 4-hour DMT experience, or 4 to 6 or longer. DMT, to smoke it, is very short-lived and very intense. So metaphor I've heard is taking ayahuasca is climbing to the top of the mountain, then climbing down, whereas smoking DMT is teleporting yourself to the top of the mountain for a couple minutes, then dropping back down. Another very interesting molecule, which I think is probably the most powerful psychedelic experience you can experience, is the 5-MeO-DMT, which is similarly a tryptamine, but a very different experience to NN-DMT, which is in ayahuasca. 5-MeO, I describe it as the God particle. It's another one that can be, it comes from the bufo toad, although there's sustainability issues with the bufo toad. So thankfully it's available synthetically as well. And synthetically you can snort it or you can smoke it. And it's really kind of brings you to the base of being, as it were. It's a very, very powerful experience. It's very entertaining to Google 5-MeO-DMT and Mike Tyson and hear about his incredible transformational experience with 5-MeO-DMT.
Yeah. You wish he smoked some of that before he went into the ring.
Yeah, before he bit a guy's ear off. Yeah. I think that's kind of, and then there's MDMA, of course. It'd be awful if I didn't mention that, having been a part of MAP. So MDMA is known by the street name ecstasy, and it's the drug that is most far along in the drug development process to turn it into a prescription. So Rick Doblin, who formed the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, in the US in 1986, has been working towards turning that into a drug ever since, basically. Well, at first he was working towards making sure that it didn't get scheduled the way it ended up being scheduled. He took the DEA to court twice and actually won both times, and the DEA did what they did anyway. So MDMA assisted psychotherapy is now in phase 3 clinical trials, FDA approved, and it actually was granted breakthrough therapy status because it's so effective, or showed so much promise. In the phase 2 trials, 78% of the people who went through the experience no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress disorder after 3 psilocybin sessions. So super powerful. And it should, knock on wood, it should be a prescription within 2 or 3 years. And we're looking at special access to MDMA in Canada fairly soon as well. There's a company that's working towards that. So it's PTSD is a tough one to treat, and it's beautiful that MDMA is showing so effective in doing that.
Yeah, I think there was you had shared a couple of links to where you as a potential patient can apply to. Would it be a patient who's applying to perhaps get into these trials, or would it be a medical practitioner?
I think the patient can apply themselves. If you just go to maps.org, maps.org, you'll be able to find a pathway there. I think the Vancouver site is still looking for patients.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind? I mean, you've worked with several, but often work with Ibogaine. Can you tell me some of your success rates in relative to?
For sure. So anecdotally, Ibogaine seems to have anywhere from a 40 to 60% success rate. In my
And is that specifically for opioid?
Yeah, I'm speaking of opioids, but I think it works for other substances as well. It's a really good reset. Like I say, these are powerful forgiveness medicines. So it's really good at just pressing that reset button. Alcohol, as an example, it does work for that, but you need to detox for about a week before. You can't be in the detox situation. And that's true for alcohol and most of these substances. In fact, I'd say lower hanging fruit, if you have alcoholism and you're looking to overcome your addiction, would be to do something like a psilocybin journey or LSD journey. But you should detox first. Yeah, it's really amazing working with Ibogaine. It's been such an honor to work with that substance, because you work with people who, Ibogaine works for something like depression as well, but it's a long, hard road before you pop out the other end and say, you know what, I actually do feel less depressed. It's, like I say, a 36-hour long journey. And then you get some sleep and you still feel like crap for a couple of days. So you're like, why did I do this? But for somebody who is dependent on opiates, the way we would work is you wait until they're in a bit of withdrawal, and then you go in with a bit of Ibogaine. And within about 45 minutes, their withdrawal symptoms disappear. So that's remarkable for somebody who's been dependent on opiates for a long time, that something other than an opiate is taking away their withdrawal symptoms. So it just provides tremendous relief and tremendous buy-in at that point, rather, unlike somebody who might just be depressed, they realize, holy smokes, I don't feel like an opiate right now. And then they're a bit more compliant, I guess, for the rest of the 10 days they're staying with us.
Yeah.
But I've seen just the most remarkable transformations. It's like I say, it's been such an honor. I've made some of my dearest friends are people that I've worked with. A lot of them have come forward and shared their stories. I was involved in a documentary film called Dosed, dosedmovie.com. And that's the story of one woman's journey using Ibogaine and Iboga and psilocybin to overcome her depression and substance use disorder. Adrienne is the subject of the movie. She's a really, really dear friend. And it's an awesome, award-winning documentary. You should check it out if you're interested in this topic. And, but yeah, like 40 to 60% success rate. And I think that if it was resourced properly, we could get that success rate up way more. If the whole healthcare system got behind giving somebody Ibogaine, and we, created a beautiful community context to work with the substance, I think that's something that's coming up as we're looking at these substances as, people will often say these are not magic bullets. It's true, they're not magic bullets. They're tremendously effective in helping a person kind of reset themselves in the places that'll help. But to go back into this world, which the world overall has a lot of trauma and healing to do, it doesn't quite hit all the notes. So it's important to set up community where there are many people going through similar experiences, where you can fall back on community. And I think it's through creating these healed, or at least communities that acknowledge the need to heal and the need to keep walking on that path. I think that's ultimately how we will heal the world overall, is to create these little individual communities of people dedicated to healing.
I think a large part of our audience is definitely coming from the cannabis sector. And we often do say that cannabis is that sort of gateway drug to other natural medicines, right? So we're hoping that the legalization, sort of decriminalization of cannabis will also lead into a very similar path for some of these psychedelics. And one of the questions in the question group is, when do you start thinking there will be a decriminalization of psychedelics in Canada and then a legalization?
So the landscape as I see it is decriminalization has a really high chance of happening. And it's not because of psychedelics. It's because we're in the middle of a bloodbath in this opiate crisis. And some, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, a Liberal MP in Ontario, is working towards a decriminalization bill. Vancouver, Edmonton, Montreal, they have all, St. Catharines, they have all at a municipal level made the decision that they want to decriminalize all substances within their municipalities. So what they're essentially asking the federal government for is a Section 56 exemption to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, so they can make their whole municipalities decriminalized. And psychedelics would just benefit from that. That's, as I'm sure your audience knows, prohibition has never worked. Prohibition of alcohol hasn't worked, prohibition of drugs, drugs won the war on drugs, like that has been decided now. So it's just about getting rid of these kind of, these horrible backwards laws, especially around things like plants and plant medicines. Like, I just see tremendous arrogance in trying to outlaw something that grows out of the ground. As the cannabis audience will know, it's just ridiculous. So I think decriminalization has a strong chance of happening. Legalization is on its way to happening through the medicalization of these substances. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. There's going to need to be, once these substances are turned into prescriptions, there's still a rescheduling that needs to happen. So I wouldn't say, it's a done deal by any means, but it looks like it's moving in the right direction. Within Canada, we have received Section 56 exemptions for psilocybin for end-of-life anxiety. Bruce Tobin and the team at TheraPsil were the first to knock down that barrier. It took Bruce about 2 years to make that happen, petitioning Health Canada for a long time. Then he finally made it happen. Psilocybin is very effective at helping people overcome end-of-life anxiety if they have any terminal illnesses. That's a step in the right direction. Other companies like Mdma, Journey Centers out of Alberta, they've successfully had the Section 56 exemptions granted as well. Another Section 56 exemptions were granted for therapists to receive psilocybin so that they can know what the experience is like. And I think 4 therapists were granted that originally and have gone through their own psilocybin experiences. One of those, they've gone through their experiences, and then unfortunately on both the end of life exemptions and on the therapist exemptions, kind of Health Canada has stopped approving these applications for now. It's sad. These people are literally at the end of their life. They don't really have any time to wait. It's sad that some of these patients have been granted permission to use Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying program. So they are allowed to end their lives, but they are not legally allowed to try the psilocybin experience. So something's a bit backwards there. Through the Canadian Psychedelic Association, we've been working with Michael Kidd from the Kidder Group and a coalition of a few other companies, Field Trip, Mdma Journey Centers, and we've been working towards, the Nikian Foundation, been working towards petitioning the government to have psychedelic assisted psychotherapy included as a part of the conversation around the medical assistance in dying program, or MAID as it's called. So the MAID legislation has been around for 5 years. Since it's been around for 5 years, it is up for parliamentary review. We, in the last 3 weeks, completed a Hill Lobby Week, which normally you'd go to Ottawa, arrange a bunch of meetings and meet with politicians in person. But one of the benefits of COVID is we can just Zoom everything. So we did this Hill Lobby Week, and our little coalition spoke to approximately 30 politicians and Health Canada regulators in the last few weeks. I was involved in a dozen of those calls, and the response has been tremendous. So even conservative politicians. I was on the line with a conservative MP. He was at least 70 years old. He had been a farmer in rural Saskatchewan most of his life, relatively new to politics. And one of our party started the conversation by saying, well, we're here to talk about a bit of a weird topic. And this guy goes, not anymore. Everybody's talking about this. That's a conservative MP. And psychedelic assisted psychotherapy at the end of life makes sense to a lot of conservatives because they were against the medical assistance in dying legislation in the first place. So if we can provide another way to end people's suffering rather than actually end their lives, that's very attractive. Another conservative MP we were on the line with, he said, I know we're here to talk about medical assistance in dying, but would it be possible to talk about some of the other great things that psychedelics seem to be good for? So pretty amazing. Like, you can't expect anything better than that. So
can you share maybe a little bit why that is? Like cannabis, the stigma around cannabis still is maintained despite the fact that, you know, THC, CBD, and so many other cannabinoids and terpenes have medicinal benefits. Why do you, I mean, I know that there's still a stigma around psychedelics in terms of, you know, the idea that everyone has to have these trips and whatnot, but there seems to be a greater acceptance of psychedelics. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. I can hypothesize that this time around, with the psychedelic renaissance, as it were, nobody, I don't know, nobody that's getting a platform seems to be talking about the recreational use of these substances. It all seems to be around the ceremonial, around the therapeutic, around the sacred use of these substances over recreational. And I think that's a really good PR campaign. Personally, you know, the thing that brought me to this table was the recreational use of these substances as a young man. So I'm not personally against the recreational use of these substances. You know, a party or a concert can be a great setting for something like this if done with good intent. And, you know, I think that may have been a bit of the hang up for cannabis. I'm not sure. But I think as far as psychedelics themselves, I think the tremendous therapeutic benefit that's being seen. I think another part is these substances, unless you're talking about microdosing, which is taking a sub-perceptual amount of psychedelics, like maybe 1/10 of a dose of magic mushrooms or 1/10 of a dose of LSD. You don't really feel it, but you tend to have a pretty good day while it's inside you. Beyond something like that, nobody's really talking about the chronic use of these substances either. It's not like you do a 3 or 4 gram mushroom journey every day. In fact, you do a 3 or 4 gram mushroom journey and you probably don't want to do one again for a very long time. If you ask somebody the next day, do you want to do that again? They'll probably say never again. But as time goes on, you realize, yeah, maybe I should do a bit of a touch up. So I think those are a few of the factors that are playing into it. We're really talking about at least on the, like I say, on the public, within the public sphere, we're talking about the therapeutic and ceremonial use of these substances, not so much recreational. Hi, Pascal. I'm staying at Pascal's house. He's on the board of the CPA as well.
There's another question in the chat there around, are there some addictive properties to psychedelics?
They seem to be anti-addictive, kind of through and through.
Like you don't want to do ayahuasca more than, once in a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ayahuasca is the one you bring up, but ayahuasca is one I see people going back to again and again. Again, I wouldn't say that it's because they're addicted. I think it's because they just get tremendous benefit from it. And perhaps perhaps some people use it as a bit of a crutch for sure. Psilocybin, if you use it in large doses 2 days in a row, it's just not going to work for you. MDMA, if you use MDMA 2 days in a row, it's just not going to work for you. Your system needs time to reset, and your receptors need a little break. Ibogaine, as I've explained, is incredibly anti-addictive. Speaking about a mushroom dose and not wanting to do that again, people go through a 36-hour long Ibogaine experience, and they're not rushing back to doing anything like that. LSD, same thing. There's really no evidence that these substances are addictive, and quite the opposite. They seem to help people overcome more debilitating addictions.
I noticed another question there in the Q&A regarding, the opportunity. Of course, Big Pharma still loves their SSRIs, and probably does not want to, give them up for smaller treatments of psilocybin. But can Big Pharma step into the psychedelic space and, perhaps removing some of the spiritualness out of some of these products and still get the same effects?
I guess we'll see, because whether or not it's Big Pharma, these drugs are being developed through the regular drug development process and will become prescriptions. I think MAPS is definitely keeping a degree of sacredness into the treatments that they get, and that doesn't need to be like a religious sacredness. It's just kind of honoring the fact that you're doing something very significant. Big Pharma, though, are they going to dive into this? Who knows? These are a lot of them are expired patents. You can't patent a lot of these substances. That's where Big Pharma makes their money, is they create novel molecules that nobody else can make, and they've got exclusivity for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they will sell them until the generics become a part of the market, and then they don't make quite as much money, but they still make money if it's a good drug.
Like, so currently, is there a 5 MEO DMT that is pharmaceutically available, or is that
no, not pharmaceutically available? It's one that's not scheduled within Canada currently, so it's not technically illegal within Canada. Mm-hmm. I see a good question from Bill in the chat there, that some people use DMT pens frequently. I've seen that for sure as well. I guess to answer my question again, is anything can become addictive. Like you could abuse anything. You can develop an unhealthy relationship that starts affecting your life negatively with anything if you really made an effort to do so. Or in the instance of maybe, I don't want to take heat for saying if you really made an effort to do so. It's just, patterns are patterns. We're creatures of habit. And if you put something into your life every single day, eventually a certain momentum is going to grow around that, and it's going to be harder to stop doing that. Ketamine, for sure. I've seen unhealthy relationships with ketamine. I would suggest that and work with physicians who have been working with ketamine for years in the States, and they have, because the people that work with them just keep the ketamine within the therapeutic context, that they don't see a lot of instance of abuse. And within the therapeutic context, ketamine, you'll take it in a lozenge, you'll take it intravenously, or you'll take it in an intramuscular injection. You're not snorting it. So when people abuse ketamine at home and kind of just, again, use it on a more daily basis, it's not generally physically addictive. it's been described that it's not really physically addictive, but it's ontologically addictive. It's like your being, it's psychologically addictive. Your being and your mind kind of just turn to it again and again. So thanks for bringing up that point, Bill, that everything needs to be used with caution and with a healthy intent around it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's can parallel cannabis as well in terms of that you can definitely form habits around cannabis and kind of become more dependent on it, but is not as addictive as perhaps coffee or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I have a relationship with cannabis that's been most of my adult life, and there were definite points in my life where I'm like, this is holding me back and I can't seem to stop. Like I think I understand addiction personally, most because of trying to stop cannabis and not being able to for large lengths of time. It was actually my first ayahuasca experience that forever changed my relationship to cannabis and put it in a more healthy context where I'm not, I don't feel I'm abusing it anymore. It's not a problematic relationship anymore.
Yeah. I see another question in the Q&A there about who can actually prescribe these substances.
Nobody right now, really. Once MDMA as the example, it's moving through the drug development process. It should be successful. The results of the first kind of tranche of phase 3 studies have been released, and there was a great article it was published in Nature. It was a great article in the New York Times. So eventually that should get a drug identifier number. Once it's got a drug identifier number, physicians will be able to prescribe it. But the way this is set up is, in order to prescribe it, in order to get access to it, you need to have a MAPS trained therapist that is going to administer the substance. So there can be a prescribing doctor who has not been through that training, is my understanding, but there needs to be a therapist who has been through the MAPS training that is then authorized to receive the MDMA through their physician and their pharmacist, and then complete the therapy, which is not just take this MDMA and go home and have fun. It's, there's sessions beforehand, there's the session itself, there's sessions after that session, then there's another session, then there's another session, and there's all the integration that comes after it. So the MAPS just won a big win. This is already going to be a very expensive therapy, but the FDA was coming back to MAPS and saying, you're going to need somebody at the level of a physician present through the entire experience. And that was going to get very expensive. I think they might have even been asking for 2. So they actually, MAPS took that up the flagpole at the FDA, and they're not going to require that. It needs to be one person who is credentialed sitting for the person, and another person could be even just a lay sitter, I believe, who's been through and understands the substance. So that's going to keep costs down a little bit.
So that'll be an opportunity for people to support others, essentially becoming sitters for other patients. That's great.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of room for a lot of good people within this field. Other substances, so that's talking about MDMA. Psilocybin is on its way to being the same. If we are, if we're there's a few different ways that we could be successful, but I still see a doctor being involved in most of the process. Like even Ibogaine, I've applied through Health Canada's Special Access Drug Program to use Ibogaine. I've unsuccessfully applied, unfortunately, but I did that in conjunction with 2 physicians, a different physician for each application.
Right. There was another question. Okay, here's a question. I mean, just in general, I had a question prior to this. Right now, if you were to, you can send psilocybe spawn and um, through the mail, but
Hmm.
could you actually send a psilocybe mushroom in the
No,
mail?
I don't think technically. I know it's happening.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
There's quite a lot of microdosing sites and things like that
Yeah,
set up in Canada. And, on one level, I'm like, more power to them, but I don't think that's legal. And, and yeah, I think there is kind of legal loopholes that you could receive the spores legally and then grow them yourself.
right.
But I'm no lawyer.
Well, and we're going to have some of that information both at the Psychedelic Summit. Hopefully, have some representatives from who can speak to the licensing process as well as the legal issues around psychedelics as well.
Hmm.
Um, I think I've got a little bit more time, Trevor, just to ask these last couple of questions. Uh, there's a question here: are there any opportunities for non-medical professionals to get into this industry right now? And care to comment on that?
Um, I would say so. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but there is a very vibrant community that is very passionate about these substances, and I think I think there's always going to be an underground in this realm. And frankly, I think there should be an underground in this realm, because the way I look at it, there's 7 billion people on earth that could benefit from this, and our current medical system is already overtaxed. It's already inefficient. So if there is an opportunity for well-intentioned and well-tooled and well-trained and knowledgeable underground practitioners to support people, I think they should. Um, Plugging into the Psychedelic Association, becoming a member there. We have a social network that's off of Facebook. We use something called Mighty Networks for our social network. And when people ask me, how can I get involved in this space, I just say, plug into the community and watch for your opportunity and hold out the intent that you want to do something within this space. There's going to be it's still going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is going to be a massive industry. And I think if you start plugging in now, start looking for your niche, start looking for what feels good, do your own work, I think is a critical aspect of this work. These are incredibly healing and transformative substances. Not only are they healing, meaning they can take a person from -10 and bring them to 0, they're also enhancing. So they can take a person from 0 and bring them to +10. And I think that's another whole huge aspect of this that we didn't even touch upon, is this can make the well better. So even if you don't feel that you've got trauma to heal from, and if you don't think so, I've got some news for you.
I say, watch Gaber's wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. But to just do your own work, like these are substances that help the spirit. And the word spirit has so many connotations to it, but to me, spirit is just energy and motion. Like, how do you show up? Are you depressed? Are you miserable? Do you hate the world? Or are you on fire and ready to be a part of the world and make the world better? That's what we need right now. That's what we need, is people getting involved in a pet project that could help make the world a better place. And these substances can really help empower a person to head in that direction.
Yeah. See, that's the reason I want to smoke what you're smoking. Trevor, you embody that so well. I did want to answer this last question because it's in your home province there, or your current home province. I believe there's a question there. How is that mushroom dispensary operating legally in Vancouver?
Yeah, they're not operating legally. It's Dana Larson did the first one. So I was involved in So Dana Larson, who has been a cannabis activist for years, I think he put out a press release saying that he was selling microdoses online. And within that press release, it stated that he was going to eventually open up a mushroom dispensary in Vancouver. A Vancouver City Councillor who historically doesn't have a very good relationship with Dana Larson, she created a motion against psilocybin that was being presented to City Hall and Council in Vancouver. So a bunch of us got together, and that's actually when we registered the URL decriminalizenature.ca. And this was kind of pre the Psychedelic Association being a thing. Just before that, like it was in motion, but we hadn't registered it as a nonprofit yet. And we set up a website where people could go and send a pre-formatted letter to Vancouver City Council members saying we are against this motion. The motion was silly. It talked about injectable psilocybin as a danger and all this money going towards drug cartels through the psilocybin racket. So it didn't make a lot of sense on many levels. And people put in, I think we had more than 750 people send letters to the Vancouver City Council. Then a dozen of us showed up. It was actually September 11th, 2019, an easy date to remember. And we spoke, all 12 people that spoke against this motion, including a mycologist who said that he's seen psilocybin mushrooms growing on City Hall grounds, including some people who have had radical healing from the psilocybin experience. I spoke, Mark Hayden, the former executive director of MAPS Canada, now of Psygen, spoke. And it was awesome because one of the city councillors, Councillor Pete Fry, he spoke out of the gate, and we knew he had an ally right away. He's like, does this say injectable psilocybin? Are you talking? Like he was funny. So we actually worked with him afterwards towards a motion on the city level in Vancouver, which we didn't really need to do because, as we've discussed, the decrim overall movement kind of took over, and the mayor of Vancouver spearheading that. So that motion got shut down. Had that motion been successful, there might have been a little more of a coalition at the municipal level to be ready to fight against these dispensaries as they're opening, but that didn't happen. So the dispensaries are there. They are there as a matter of activism. The owners feel as though they are doing the right thing. And, when I'm wearing one of my hats, I agree with them.
Yep.
At the same time, I think these substances, to look at cannabis, I feel as though the legalization of cannabis needed to happen. I'm glad it happened. At the same time, I feel as though maybe a lot of the science towards the medical use, the very expensive science towards the medical use of cannabis, maybe died out a bit once legalization happened. Like my grandmother was told by her doctor, maybe cannabis would work for her arthritis. And there's my grandma going into some cannabis shop, speaking to some 20-year-old about what she should do. And she really didn't get a good answer. So it would be really good if we did have phase 3 clinical trials about how the best way to use cannabis to treat arthritis and a myriad of other things. So I think it's really important that track continue for things like psilocybin. I'm thrilled that I'm working with a company, Neon Mind Biosciences, which is taking psilocybin through the drug development process for obesity and weight management, which is a really novel idea, but I could see why we could be incredibly successful at that. And there's other companies taking psilocybin through the drug development process. So I want that to continue. At the same time, prohibition has never worked. If somebody wants to find mushrooms, they're going to find mushrooms. If they can walk into a shop and buy them or go online, I'm not against that.
I could listen to you all day. I appreciate your time already. Trevor is also helping us out for our Psychedelic Summit. So many of the names that Trevor has mentioned, Erica Dick, hopefully Mark Hayden, and others, hopefully Jasmine, will all be able to come down to Niagara. And
I
we
hope
hope to
so.
have many of you who are watching and listening to be there as well. Thank you again, Trevor.
Thanks,
Please.
Av. A real pleasure being here. And I'm excited about the conference. I'm excited that, that this conversation has evolved so much to be able to speak with such nuance on everything we discussed in this hour. It's great.
Perfect. Check out CPA, the Canadian Psychedelic Association website, Decriminalize Nature as well. Check them out. Maybe you can kind of rally the troops in your own municipality to look at the future of psychedelics as a treatment.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Av. Take care.
Cheers.